This episode of The Candid Frame is sponsored by the Charcoal Book Club. The Charcoal Book Club is a monthly subscription service for photo book enthusiasts. Working with the most respected names in contemporary photography, Charcoal selects and delivers essential photo books to a worldwide community of collectors. Each month, members receive a signed first edition monograph and an exclusive print to add to their collections. Join the club by visiting charcoalbookclub.com and use the promo code TheCandidFrame at checkout and receive a 10% discount on your first membership payment. We also have the support of LensRentals.com, the largest online camera rental house in the U.S. They carry the most popular brands and models of cameras and lenses, but also anything you need for video, lighting, post-processing accessories, and more. Whether you need something for a one-time assignment or want to test it out before you buy, LensRentals.com is there to help. Explore their extensive inventory and save 10% on your first order when you sign up for their newsletter at LensRentals.com/newsletter. The photographic community consists of more than just photographers and people who sell equipment. There are designers, editors, curators, educators, printers, retouchers, gallery owners, and more. They are people whose lives revolve around the image. Now, it's easy to forget that when you're focused on just creating photographs, but those people are as essential as everyone else. Sybylla Smith wears many hats in the photographic community. She's an independent curator, a writer, an educator, and an advisor. Her work has created opportunities for photographers of all genres and backgrounds. Whether she's curating an exhibit or helping a photographer design their next publication, she brings insight, thoughtfulness, and generosity to all that she does. This is Ibadian X, and welcome back to The Candid Frame. Thank you, and welcome.
Thank you. Well, I want to get to know you as much as you can ask me, but I don't know if that's the point of this. But
we can have a conversation. That's good. So if you have any questions for me, I'll be glad to field them, because I like it when it turns into a conversation.
Yes, I mean that's what I anticipated having. But as I got to, I've been listening to you, but when I looked historically at how long you've been interviewing people, what a library, so rich.
Yeah. And, I oftentimes don't really think about it. I know that there's a number attached to it, 556 or whatever it is at this point. And the only time it strikes me is when people tell me, oh, I'm going back all the way to episode 1 and trying to catch up. And I'm going, that's a lot of hours.
Yeah, that is. Yeah.
Yeah. So, but thankfully, people are usually doing other things while they're listening. So it's not like they have to be tethered to a computer. They could be cooking. They could be taking the dog for a walk, maybe doing some stuff at work. A lot of people listen to it while they're commuting or when they were commuting.
Yeah, for me, actually, I got really caught up over the pandemic because one of the things that just happened is even in lockdown, thank goodness I wasn't in a place where they gave you a geographic limit, because I know countries where you couldn't go past a kilometer. I would walk, and I really got into listening as well as walking. I thought of two things metaphorically. It was putting one foot in front of the other, and it was also allowing me to kind of metabolize. And of course, last year gave us so much to integrate that's what I did. And it's become such a habit that I've fitted in, walk around plugged in. Tonight I went to get takeout because I was staying in the studio and I was listening. Sarah Meitzner was leaving MoMA and had a time. So I just bumped it over to my phone, took it with me to the restaurant to pick up my takeout and stay.
Oh, I missed that. Yeah.
On the conversation. It's hard to know. There's so much being offered simultaneously, really.
If I don't put it immediately in my calendar, it just passes me up. And that's one of the things about you I was wondering about. It's like, I think I'm busy, but I see all the stuff that you're doing. And I'm like going, whatever this woman's eating, I got to find out what it is.
Well, yeah, I know. It doesn't come from that. It comes from energy and a passion. I just recently, I'd say in this year, stopped burning the candle at both ends, but it's been fun.
And how did you manage to do that?
By hook or by crook. You know, it's interesting. You know my husband, and I don't know that you know that we're married. Most people don't, and it's really funny. Someone will go like, "Hey, you should know this person," and it's like, "Yeah, I do." It's Eric. That's happened so often. It's Eric Luden of Digital Silver Imaging.
Oh, yeah.
The two of us, you know, normally people marry something to balance them out.
Right.
And unfortunately for our children, we didn't do that. Our children will never be entrepreneurs, ever. And both Eric and I, without planning to do this, we work in different arenas within the same field. However, we both basically created something that didn't exist. You know, when digital silver imaging happened, Eric was translating something where it wasn't only he was offering the service, people didn't know it was possible. So there was the whole education piece in addition to the workforce piece. And that's actually what happened for me too. I mean, it wasn't thought out for sure, but it's really been fun. It's been a privilege. It's been a big uphill in terms of keeping all of it moving and just being a part of a dynamic conversation. And Eric and I have a lot of similarities. Like, we both really get enthusiastic about ideas. We have too many for the time allotted to us. Mm-hmm. And then also, we're really big on connecting in terms of when we see something or hear something, that's just who we are, you know, in terms of wanting to definitely come from like more is more and there's enough to go around. You know?
That's something that I really have appreciated learning about you. Mm-hmm. Not only how you help photographers in terms of them getting and understanding what their voice and their vision is, whether it's in a book or a portfolio or a website, but it's that there are people who are connectors, you know, the people that are able to connect this person to that person. And that seems to me that is where some of your joy comes from, because mm-hmm. I hear it in your voice when you've spoken before. It's like, this isn't a woman who's burned out on what she's doing. It seems like when I hear you, you're as enthusiastic and as passionate as when you started.
Yeah, no, really. I feel fortunate that my career is such that there has been a synergistic blend. And in this last iteration, it was an integration. It let me have my academic, analytical piece and then my aesthetic, kind of discerning eye piece come together. So it's really exciting. And the intersection of, I'm excited about photography as a medium, and yet I'm excited about the layers of what can be done with photography, or what photography does do, the visual culture conversation. And that has been so dynamic over the last several years. It's so much to integrate and so much to evolve and move with. I was always aware of the power of photography, but we grew into this visual literacy in the last 20 years. It's like all these pieces came together. I mean, I was trained as an activist, and I see myself and call myself a visual activist because I see the empowerment that's possible from an individual standpoint, really someone finding their visual voice. And it doesn't have to necessarily be tied to a social justice issue. However, that undercurrent is always being addressed by it. And I find that it's like a playground that photography offers me to work in the things that I am truly, truly passionate about, and that I can see the impact. You know, when I'm working with someone around the concept-aware curriculum that I developed, all I'm really on is a collaborative journey to be with someone when they step into their voice, and it shows up in the work, and I'm there to say, let's figure out what comes naturally. Like, what's the propensity you lean towards without really thinking about it? And what I'm asking people to do is stop and kind of analyze the process, to bring awareness, to be able to name, this is how I see. And when you name it, you own it and you step into it differently. And it immediately shows. And my other part when I'm teaching is to ask you to get out of your comfort zone and really play in other areas, be a beginner, be challenged, and that kind of playfulness and curiosity will refresh the very things that you come by naturally. Like, I think that we tend to minimize what we do well and frankly what we see, and then we're like, doesn't everybody see that? And it's like, no, they don't. So it's really fun when people get it. I have one example which was really funny because this person came around to tell me he was a business person who found photography later in life. And he said, you have a marketing problem because I'm not a soundbite. I'm not a one thing. And he came to a concept aware weekend workshop and he literally didn't have a thing with him, a computer, a piece of paper, nothing. And I don't leave home. I'm always with an implement. It's how I think. So he sat through a weekend very engaged, but not having any of that kind of like capturing. And for 2 years, whenever I ran into him, he would say like, I'm still thinking, I'm still mulling. And truly, that's what I tell people. I hope I leave you with more questions than answers. And this stuff takes a while to unpack. And 2 years later, he was working, gun violence was very, very important to him. And he was at a rally and I put together people in a Facebook group and he posted work and said that he had gone to the rally and for over an hour was frustrated, couldn't figure out what was going on, and that he kept thinking concept aware. And he said, and I got clear, and here's my portraits. And there must have been 8 black and white portraits. And I literally, I cried, then I called him and I just said, okay, you've got to tell me what is it? What happened? He said that in that conversation, he said that I gave him the confidence to like what he likes and to be clear. And what he had done in that particular protest was he found the young people that had signage that basically alluded to "Am I next?" And he took black and white portraits of these young people. So he really drilled in, said what he needed to say.
Wow. I've been having several conversations over the last couple of weeks about the idea of transitioning from being focused on the individual photograph and thinking about creating an essay or a body of work and thinking about, okay, now that I have all these skills and have this experience, now what do I want to say? And I think and I was saying that that's sort of a demarcation line. Some people are not able to cross that. And so they just remain on that space where they're strictly focused on making the individual photograph. And to my thinking, experience a lot of frustration because they feel like, well, I don't know if I'm getting any better, am I any good? And it's like, well, at some point you have to start thinking about what do you want to say now with this? Because that's really where you're going to develop a voice, a style, whatever people want to call it. In your experience, what do you think is the struggle for some to be able to make that transition? And what in your experience has helped people to do that?
Really interesting, because I see it all the time. I basically want to tell people the product will take care of itself if you focus on the process. So people get in their own way because they want the end product, and that's where they put their focus and then try to wrestle stuff in there when it's actually the opposite. I often use the analogy of Hansel and Gretel and say, pick up the breadcrumbs, and the breadcrumbs are your curiosity. What lights you up? That is what you need to follow. And if you pay attention to that, if there's observation and time and thought and frankly, courage to let that lead you, you will define your voice. I talk often about being in conversation with your work. It was interesting when I was in clothing design, we would often say, like, what does this fabric want to do? If you were working with it in draping or whatever. When I was on set, sometimes a photographer would be like, what does this want to do? Be in conversation with what your medium is and what you're working with. For instance, I love this one image from a photographer who really got it, who photographed this dress just for the lines in the back and just brought it in and was sculptural. And it's like, no, not every fashion item needs to be seen from the front. There was one man in my workshop one time, and I use it as an example because he had a 20-year commercial business in photography, and I watched the light bulb go off in his head. It was incredible because he basically went, I don't need to have eye contact for a portrait. Oh my gosh. Like, nope.
Yeah.
But we walk around with some of these like parameters in our own head. And I love to do this thing when I'm working with people in a workshop situation is I do an exercise and it really brings out your propensities. And then I like to say, like, let's take them away. Like, let's say someone's really comfortable in color. Then I want to see them work in black and white. Or if someone's super graphic, I want to say, I just need you to do some lifestyle and get outside what you're normally doing. One of the ways I look at concept aware to try to frame it is I say it is how you see and why it matters. That's what I'm trying to take apart.
So let's break down, this term, concept aware. I mean, you mentioned that first photographer who was at the demonstration, and that he had a sort of clarity of vision of what he was going for as he was photographing. But it seems to be more than sort of awareness when you're shooting. So could you expand on that?
Sure. One of the things that I do in concept aware is I obviously want people to think outside the box, but one of the ways I term it is if we want to think outside the box, the first thing we have to do is define the box. And we're all walking around with a box. And the box I'm asking you to originally start from is things you wouldn't necessarily think are in your photographic toolkit, but they are things like preconceptions, limitations, bias, fear. I talk about the fact that we all come with demographic labels and we can't take away some of them, but our awareness of them is extremely important so that you are coming from a place of awareness before you even take an image, like that you're really getting a sense of who you are and how you see. Because if you don't take that time, that's going to show in the work, and you're going to see it if you do take that time.
Yeah.
There's a Junot Diaz quote I use that says, there's a shape around the privilege that we walk with. Like, we all have a shape, and it's shaped about our privilege. And it's like, so that's where I start, which certainly throws a lot of people off that we're talking about you. Like, and it's this real interesting, I think that's why my background, someone said I used to work on people's insides, and then when I went through the fashion piece, it was on their outsides. But I think where I'm working now is such an integration of both, right? And I want people to get clear and aware on their lens and then jump into the aesthetics too, right? Because they're equally important. You need all of it.
Yeah, I think that because we rely on this, electromechanical box to create the work,
Mm-hmm.
the preoccupation can get too focused on that. At some point, when you want to have a voice, you have to have a certain degree of growing self-awareness.
Mm-hmm.
Not that you've reached some point of nirvana, where all of a sudden now I'm ready to give my voice, because it's going to evolve and change, and a lot of false starts. I've returned to writing fiction, and one of the things that held me back in terms of that was this not feeling that I had something to say.
Mm.
That I wanted to say something, but felt that things about my experiences would not be that I couldn't use them. So I got to be a good technician in terms of writing, because I spent most of my life writing, but I wasn't investing myself in the work. I was being very sort of technical about it and being effective, but it wasn't as genuine and honest a creation as I wanted it to be. I felt I was doing that a little more with my photography, but I know that I was also restraining that as well, because of my unwillingness to just really put myself completely there. And it's a challenge to be able to do that. But I've seen, when I see work that comes from that, I know it immediately, because I'm responding to it in a very visceral way. That it's not about, how well it's composed or how sharp it is or what the light is. I will physically go feel it. It's like, oh my God, and
Yes.
that does not come from some technical competency.
Mm-mm.
It's by taking that raw core of you, as misshapen as you may think it is sometimes, and then giving yourself permission to use it in one way or another. And it seems like you've helped facilitate a lot of people to do just that. But why are you capable of doing it and helping them do it when they can't?
That's great. I'm just smiling because I'm thinking 5 things at the same time. Number one, as you describe your situation, it was a process of integration. You were judging aspects, and as you said, the permission wasn't there. So something had to help you step into it. And the irony of it is, when you do, it impacts your work, and it impacts it positively. It does infuse it. I think we have to get out of our own way often. And I think sometimes the collaborative nature of my work with people is that I'm just splunking with somebody, and it's 2 flashlights instead of 1, and it's helpful, right? So it gives you a bit more of I use analogies all the time. So I'm going from splunking in a cave to the idea of a carabiner on rock climbing and, whatever. But it's you're not alone. And I can think of when I was developing my own ability, undergraduate and graduate, I was working with people as a social worker, and we had to integrate theory. And hilariously, I was working in, actually at that point, play therapy and group work, and you have to go talk to your supervisor after all the work, and you're reading everything, all the theorists you can think of, Freud, Jung. And my supervisor goes, "Yeah, well, you found the Smith method." And I was like, "Smith? I haven't read any Smith." And it was duh. He was talking about the fact that I had taken my pieces of all these different, and it was hysterical. It went right over my head initially. So that's that idea of taking it and integrating it yourself, and then it comes out with that blend that only you bring to it, because we each have that unique, capacity. All of your experiences and memories, and frankly, your fears and all those things I talk about in the box are necessary. They're part of your toolkit, and you need to own them. And then they once you do, they show up. And I have two other examples. One was, this was hilarious. I was going to teach at the School of Visual Arts, and I was being introduced by Katrine Eisman, who at the time was the head of the Masters of Digital Photography. And she said, Sybylla has been thinking about creativity her whole life. And I literally went like, damn, why didn't I think of that? Like, it literally was like, being reflected like that was so helpful. It was literally like, I have been thinking about that. And it helped me own my unique vantage point. It helped me move forward. You know, I'm in a book proposal process, have been for a while, on Concept Aware. And it came out of this organic process of an integration of all the different places that I was standing in relationship to making imagery, and seeing correlations that people hadn't, like our education system, how we talk about what we do, hadn't highlighted it in a way, so that if you go into a course of study in a medium of the arts, you typically study the history and you study the craft. And I'm right in the middle, because I'm going to contextualize you historically, and you better be really good at your craft. But what I'm going to be focusing on in the spotlight is that process, that integration, and that, exactly what you were talking about, which is, in my mind, you know, I talk about it if you take a class with me all the time, which is punctum, which is coming out of Roland Barthes, talking about what is it that comes from the photograph and pierces the viewer's heart. And that's that emotional impact. I call myself a punctum junkie because I am addicted to the emotional impact of photography. And I am going to plug you into your punctum, because that's like, if you get in touch with your core, as you were saying, and then that's what you're seeing with, that's what's going to hook the viewer. And I love it, because I love this other notion. I think we came around this when I was talking to and reading David Campany. Two ideas. One is that once you take a picture, it has a life of its own. Like, you don't have control over that. You don't have control over what somebody sees. And then Teju Cole writes about no photograph stands alone, because it's always going to be in this mind field of yours, of memory, experience, other images, other experiences. There's so many ways to interact with the medium. I think that's why I love it, because I love that idea of you becoming aware of your vision, and how that kind of ignites something where you know it when you see it, you know when you're in it, and then it shows up in the work. So it's this synergy.
Yeah, when people ask me about my process and trying to get me to explain it, their questions are often about, well, what are you looking for? And that's not it. You know, I am observing light and shadow, line and shape, color and gesture. But what I'm in pursuit of is a certain feeling that I get in my belly when I see all these disparate elements, and I see the potential for that moment. You know, and then my spidey senses go up. And then it's about, can I muster all the skills and experience that I have and actually turn that into something? You know, I described it the other day that it's like, you know, discovering a question and trying to find the answer. Each time, you know, and sometimes it's algebra.
And now I'm thinking.
When the moment happens, it's like, it's at that point, it's not so much about what that final image looks like. It's how I felt at that moment, when I felt like I figured it out. The photograph is proof that I did it, but I'm so much more invested in that moment. Sometimes the photograph resembles what I felt, but can't really evoke it. I can only hope that some people get a taste or a sense of that when they take a look at the photograph.
Mhm.
But I don't know whether any image I have created or ever will create will fully encapsulate that experience to someone else. It would be nice, but that's a nice goal, maybe, but it's an interesting, at least, thought exercise, if nothing else.
Well, I think that's what makes you the visionary and the creator. Isn't there a bit of like, I don't know, endorphin hit or whatever? It's like it's a you know, plugging in of energy, and you are part of that. It's like an alignment, and I think that I love the way that you describe it. And for me, listening to you, it's like that process of creating feeds itself. It's a reward in its own self, and then this object just carries it on. Like for me, it feels like it's when all those things click.
Mm-hmm.
I was discussing a book today with a photographer, and actually the model, totally synergistic. It's a self-published book by David Horton, and the model is Beatrice Lovely, who is also an actor and Swedish. And he's a street photographer, and he wanted to basically push himself out of his comfort zone and thought, he art directs in his other life. He runs he's a graphic designer, and he's art directing other people. And he thought, I need to get into that space. And he went to a modeling agency, and he worked with a couple of people. Another time, it turned out that Beatrice was who he was going to work with. And he said, I'm just trying to get into a space and kind of let things happen. And what ended up happening for them, all of it was serendipitous. None of it was pre-planned. He wasn't thinking a book. And what ended up happening was, on their first meeting, she had worn a necklace that she, from her modeling, said, do you mind if I leave this on? Do you want me to take it off? And he said, whatever, you can, it's fine. And it turns out that it represented a keepsake, and she had lost her husband very recently. She was a young woman.
Mm-hmm.
And then that became part of their conversation. And then what ensued was 2 years of photographing and putting together what ultimately became this lyrical book. And I called it a benediction, because it was what you just described of you and the photograph and the moment happening between two people. And I guess I'd say it's the creative process, and it's what feeds me, because it's just so synergistic and so exciting, and it has infinite ways of being described. My joy is being either a collaborator as you're doing that process, or like in my photo book group, talking to you about how you got there. Like, I liken it to going, in the Wizard of Oz, behind the curtain and being like, how did this happen? Because there's so many creative choices, and they get layered. If you are clear in your concept and let the process lead you, you will see all those ways that you make decisions that underscore what you're trying to say. And that's how you get an impactful piece. That's how it grows into a project. But that has to be active and has to be not looking at the prize, looking at what's right in front of you and grappling with it. And rolling with it. A lot of persistence, a lot of observation, definitely courage. That's part of being creative.
Yeah, especially when it comes time to edit that work and call it and start thinking about how it's going to be laid out. I think that's something that's rarely taught. People taught how to make pictures, but that part of it, in terms of editing and being able to discern everything you've created, is something that should be taught a hell of a lot more than it is. But I think that's the second opportunity to really engage with the work and to make the truest discoveries in terms of what the hell you were doing.
Mm-hmm.
Because when I'm making the pictures, I often feel like I don't know what the hell I'm doing. When I take a look at the photographs soon after uploading them, I think they're all shite, and I don't even want to look at them. And it's only later on when I have to take those, hundreds of images and edit it down to about, 12 or 14 that I actually feel like, well, I knew what I was doing. Right. Mm-hmm. And then when I start, laying them out and trying to design something with it, that's when I get a sense of what some part of me was thinking or feeling or was trying to say in that moment. Considering that most people don't have the experience of knowing how to do that in an effective way. Talk to me about the collaboration that you have with them, because it's not just you telling them this is what works and just do what I tell you. Mm-hmm, You're educating them so they can learn how to do it themselves. But tell me what that dynamic is like.
Sure. I love how you describe things and open up areas. My problem is that you make me think of too many things at the same time. So I'll try. So initially, one of the things, I'll get to this question to answer it, but one of the things you made me think of, one of my book conversations was with the photographer Matt Eck, who is so gifted at thinking about the imagery. He literally throws it in a drawer for a couple of years sometimes, goes back. And what you're talking about, you describing this, and this is something he gets into describing, you're listening to the work. You're allowing it to have its voice, and you are listening to it. And then you start to discern. I talk in my collaborative work, I talk about images having weight, right? And being able to look at a number of them and start to it's like when you filter anything else, let's figure out what can be taken away often and what rises to the top. And what's really interesting for me, I one time I came up with the, because I'm a marketing problem and I don't know how to succinctly say what I do. One time I came up with the fact that I'm a visual midwife, because you're the one having the baby. I am just I'm just along for the ride, and the work has to really be yours. However, in that collaborative process, my role is to take apart what makes an impactful image, talk about that, look at ones next to each other, and know that we can't have necessarily the same tonality and what makes some different. That's where I get into this weight thing. And you actually end up categorizing your work in a lot of different ways. So for instance, it's often, I think, very much like songwriting, or honestly, like cinematography. You are trying to get a rhythm. It is a journey. It is a narrative. When I was first in the photographic arts, I assumed photographers knew what their most impactful work was. And I was going to say, hey, we put 15 images out, they're going to know the good ones. I completely disagree with that statement now and stand by it, because I think it's a real art to be able to discern your own work. And I understand how hard that is to do. There's so many things that make you wedded to an image, like what you went through to make it sometimes, right? Mm-hmm. And I'm coming in from outside and I'm not seeing that. So working with an editor is really, really helpful. And you're right that it is not me saying, this is how we do it. It is, let's figure out these parameters. What is the essence? What's the message? Sometimes I'm not even using specifics or a real word, because it's really a feeling, and we get to know what that is and we start to see it together. And then what I really love is we get into this process where we kind of fight for our own images. And why? Because less is more. That totally is true. The taking away is going to help. And that's often a problem with a lot of photographers. They're like, but, this one. And it's really, you're going to get, it's kind of think of food. If you threw in everything from the refrigerator, it wouldn't be as good a dish. It's be discerning. So anyway, that's a part of it, but you can see like we get into a negotiation, right? Like I'm like, I really feel like this has this. And then if we're trying to like be around a certain number, potentially like we each have to give up one that we really want in the mix. And so it's this whole movement, and it's really a process and a fun one. And I can watch people start to let go of certain work. It's starting to see like, oh, I get it. You know, things where I had this experience where, especially when people are making kind of like the work I was talking about earlier today, like evocative work that ends up being personal and some kind of an emotional thing going on, you can lose sight of some of the most like really basic concrete things. For instance, if you haven't utilized different wardrobe, there's only so many images of the same pieces we can make. Like there's a lot of ways that you need to be thinking. One of the things I loved about the book that we were working on to talk about today was that there was some cinema. Some of the work was very inspired by cinema. Like it had that feel of a movie still. And the photographer said, yeah, I'm kind of that weirdo that literally stops a movie and takes a photograph of a still. And it's like he has a bank of these ideas, which is genius, right? But what I loved about this book is that there was such curiosity. Nothing was anticipated. I didn't know what was going to be next, and I didn't even know why they were all together. And that tension was terrific and really held me. So that idea of how much do you say is also really interesting, and how I do think that you get to be aware of stylistic issues that may define your way of looking. But I would encourage everyone to keep evolving, to keep exploring, because it's that kind of tension that's really fun and evolutionary. Like I love watching. You know, I know that you interviewed Mona Kuhn recently, and I've been a big fan of her work for a long time, and love that this book that just is out is a retrospective, because you see evolution, and that's so exciting.
Yeah. Think about the last thing you consumed that really, really inspired your photography. It might have been a workshop or a seminar you attended, or it might have been a photo exhibit at a local gallery or museum. But if you're anything like me, it was probably a book of photography. Workshops and exhibitions are wonderful, but a book provides an experience that you can return to over and over again. As you change and as you grow as a photographer, so does the way you look and experience the images in a book. That's why I have returned to some of my favorite titles countless times over the years. Try to do that with a YouTube video. The books I have received through the Charcoal Book Club have not been books I would have considered on my own. They are often different from what I normally gravitate to, but each one has excited me because they challenge me to rethink what's possible with photography. With each book, I reconsider my assumptions about lighting, composition, and subject matter. It's been as important to my growth as going out and making photographs. I sincerely want you to experience this for yourself by signing up for the Charcoal Book Club today. They offer first edition books showcasing the best talents in contemporary photography. But if you don't like that month's release, you can choose another of their titles of similar value. They offer free shipping to the US, Canada, and the UK. It's subsidized elsewhere. Join the club at charcoalbookclub.com today, and remember to use the code TheCandidFrame at checkout and receive a 10% discount on your first membership payment. I've been lucky in my career when it comes to gear. Whether I was working at Nikon or as a photo magazine editor, I had almost unlimited access to gear. Basically, anything I wanted to try or use was just a locker or a phone call away. Admittedly, I was spoiled. So when I began my freelance career, I lost all that. I had to buy everything that I wanted to use. So as you can imagine, there was a lot of stuff that I had to do without. I had a serious case of the withdrawals after I left all that behind. But now you and I have more options. We don't have to buy. You can rent. So whether it's that super telephoto lens that you want for a safari or a new camera body you want to try out before you upgrade, you can rely on lensrentals.com to help. They have a huge inventory of photographic gear, from cameras, lenses, lighting, and more. So regardless of what you need or what you need it for, they have it, and all for a reasonable and fair price. So before you go out and make that next big purchase, enjoy some hands-on experience with that piece of kit you're interested in. If you're worried about something bad happening while using their gear, they offer 2 different insurance options, so your rental is protected against damage and theft. So you use it worry-free. Check out their inventory and save 10% on your first order when you sign up for their newsletter at lensrentals.com/newsletter. And thanks to all of you who have financially supported the Candid Frame. Your belief in what we do means the world to us and has helped us through many growing pains. I can't thank you enough. But if you haven't already, you can help contribute to our work by becoming a Patreon supporter today. You can do that by contributing $5, $10, $20 or more a month by visiting patreon.com/thecandidframe. Just $5 a month from you makes a big difference. Thank you so much for your kindness and support. Anytime I get a photo book, my first thing is to quickly go through it. Just look at the photographs and see how I respond to it, and then I put it down, and then I return to it a little while later, and I take it a little more slowly, and then I'm looking for the rhythm and the beats, right? Seeing, where the rests are, where the transitions are, because it's not just about a selection of images for me. It's like a piece of music or a concert or a concept album.
Absolutely.
Like people use it today. And it's really kind of interesting because I've seen, I think people just think about putting together a book or a portfolio with just the hits. They don't realize how monotone it can be really quickly. After about 4 or 6 images, you're ready to have some sort of shift. And if there isn't there, you just kind of go through it quickly and you just feel like you're having fast food. As good as the images may be, because the book is an opportunity to conduct a performance.
Absolutely. Absolutely. It's an orchestration. And just like you need to have space in between notes, we were talking about it today, like palette cleansers that come in. I brought up the example of the books right here are the ones that we covered in the first year of my photo book group. And I just love, I don't know if you know Laurent Chevalier's work.
No, I'm not familiar.
Oh, beautiful book with Chris Graves. You should have him on. Talking to Laurent. So this is a study of Blackness in New York. It was so much so for me, I saw some images. I didn't know Laurent. And then I'm like, I have to have this book. And then once I looked at it and was so moved literally by the sequencing was gorgeous. And I'm like, I have to talk to this person. And it was so much fun to unpack it with him. And what he used, and I'm going to try to bring up an example, he very thoughtfully brought in text and actually had I think a spoken word performer write for this. But he took every now and then an image like this, which is an image of a car on a street for people can't, most of you can't see this, but hopefully you can take a look at the book. Yeah. So he used those images of the parked car as a segue, and they were placed every now and then in between all these other more people-oriented, active images. Yeah. And I made an analogy today to something. I was taking a drawing workshop, and we had this idea that the way that it ran is that we would have like a short lecture, and then we would work in this mode. And it started with film stills, and we had to draw from that vantage point. So to tell a story in still image. And it was really interesting. Obviously, we weren't taking images, but we were being inspired by film and using drawing.
Yeah.
I took one of my favorite, I don't know if you know the movie Wings of Desire.
Oh, yeah. I could talk to you for hours on that film. Yeah.
Top 10, like love, love, love. So that's what I did. I drew pieces of that movie. It was so much fun. So it's that idea of distilling something. Like you don't have to have all the blah, blah, blah on there. You have to have those sweet notes, right? And that surprise. Like how about Wings of Desire, that everything from the angel's point of view was black and white and the mortals was color, right? That's a creative decision that was flipping massive in the message of that movie. You know, in the book I was talking about today, it was the color of the photographer said, I knew I didn't want an image on the front of my book. And the color of the fabric was beautiful. And when you open it up on the title page, the ink is the same color. And it's so subtle, but it's like those details really show. And the only other thing I wanted to say, because you made me think of it too, is this concept of like, number one, not all your ideas are good ones, and not all of your ideas are ready to be hatched.
Oh, yeah.
I bring up that Charlotte's Web scene when the goose says, I'm no flibbity-ibbity gibbet, I'm sitting on my eggs, and people need to sit on some of their eggs.
But let me ask you a question, because that is a really good point, because I think during moments like that, there's a moment of struggle, right?
Yep.
Trying to discern whether the struggle is about, oh, it's not ready to be hatched yet, or the struggle is about some baggage you're not willing to let go of to allow yourself to have to have the breakthrough that you need to. How do you discern which of the two it is?
Interesting. That's a really interesting point. I'm trying to think if I could come up with an example. I mean, I can always pretty much tell when the impatience of the creator is getting in the way. And it's more impatience with the challenge of the process. So I can ask someone, or guide someone to say, like, stick with it. Like I don't think you've made the choices yet. Like it's a lot about control, and where people's comfort zone is in letting go of some of the control and following the process. That can be scary for sure. But I'm trying to think of, when do I think someone impedes themselves? I keep looking back because it's like, this is my like store.
And I don't know if there is a good answer to that, because I asked the question and I don't even have an answer for that. For me personally, it's when I'm in the midst of those sort of struggles, the only time it's sort of really sort of revealed to me is the answer usually comes for both when I have that moment of surrender.
What do you mean for both?
For whether it's because I'm holding myself back, or whether it's just not ready. And both, I think for me, both of them involve me trying to exert a level of control that isn't working. And that I have to sort of just let it go and stop trying to fix it or figure it out. And then when I do that and have the opportunity to sort of take a step back, get a breath, find a diversion and return to it, then it becomes a little clearer. It may not be absolutely crystal clear, but I have a little more clarity than I would when I'm kind of trying to wrestle the bear.
And don't you feel, I think, a little relief internally? You feel more aligned with what's going on.
It's so exhausting.
Yeah.
being that trying to do it. It's like and it's especially clear to me whenever I'm writing something, like I'm writing the book. It's like it's always the last, quarter, the last 50 or 100 pages that are always the worst, right? It's like I've been spending weeks or months working on this thing, and it's that last period where all the doubt, insecurity, frustration, anger, impatience really comes to sort of the fore. And at some point, I just tell myself, I'm just going to let all this stuff be crap, and just get on there and just type the next page. And then later on, when I sit down and end up revising it, I realize it's not as bad as I may have felt it was at that particular moment. But there's a particular, there's a moment of absolute surrender to the process that for me has to happen in order for me to be able to move forward in any meaningful way.
Yep. In essence, not necessarily listen to yourself or acknowledge it, kind of say like, I hear you, like, sit down, like, we're still going to keep going. You're making me think of two interesting things. I remember I was teaching Concept Aware in a 5-day format at Main Media. And it was fascinating because my framework ends up with these 8 elements of how you see, or at least ones that I have created to try to help you ground yourself. Typically, I say people are looking or utilizing 3 elements most, and we try to figure out what are the 3 that are the propensity you lean towards. Some are more associated than others. So they kind of come in packages, but it takes a long time to kind of figure that out about yourself. And in a class situation, I love that people help each other out. Someone came into class that had a film background, and he was like, there was one really heavy hitting person in the class. So everybody was intimidated by that one person. And this guy literally was like, I don't know that I'm going to have a lot to contribute. And I'm like, are you kidding? Like, your film background, the idea that you anticipate before and after, like, you're going to come in with a whole new skill set. And then there was another person in the class that literally, I think probably had not been dealt with in the same way that I ended up dealing with them, because people presented in the beginning and then we came around through all these processes and exercises and to present at the end. And he was still looking for us to tell him what was good and what was going on. And so he puts the work out and I watched him set it up and I went, time out. That's not fair. It's not our work. And it's not our answer. And it made him so uncomfortable because I don't think a lot of people challenge you like that, right? Yeah. That people are so willing to give their opinion. And if I hear one more person say, oh my God, I put it on Instagram and it got a lot of likes, like, so what? Like, oh my God, that is not the place to be discerning your work. And it's like that internal place where you have to own it. And I'll just give you one other example from that class because it was fascinating. I want people to be comfortable, get comfortable with being uncomfortable. So it's not masochistic, but I really do want to put people in uncomfortable situations. It's like, you'll figure it out. And so at the middle of the week, I gave them a collaborative process. And it was really funny, like kind of randomly, I gave this bunch of inspiration and then just said, okay, so you guys can all figure it out. And it made so many people uncomfortable. Like, well, wait, you're not telling us what to do. You're not telling us who's doing what. I literally had someone ask, well, if we're making a collaborative picture, like, who gets to press the shutter? And I was like, I don't know. You'll figure that out. And so they go off, and it was one of those other experiences where I was speechless with what came back. First of all, they came back the next day so pumped because they had fun. They totally were all outside their comfort zone. And once they got going, there was nothing off the table for what could be done. And their stuff was so incredible. I invited the director to come in and see it because I was like, you aren't going to believe this. Like, they blew me out of the water. And it was so cool. And it's like, so for me, it's just so much fun to watch that process, right? People just get a whole new skill set. And then that is confidence building. It's like, okay, I didn't know how to do this. I didn't know what the hell she was talking about, but like, look what came out of it. And that's, that's part of turning down some of the volume on the things that make us stop. We don't need permission. I mean, frankly, what it is we need to give ourselves permission.
Yeah, one of the things I've learned as an educator is one of my major jobs is making people uncomfortable.
Yeah.
Because that's when they have the breakthroughs. Because if they're feeling a little fear and anxiety, that means there's an opportunity there to learn something. I know that's been for me when I've been put in that similar circumstance when I'm the student, right? If I don't feel any fear or anxiety, then I feel, oh, this is a cakewalk. I'll be able to get through this and I won't have to hardly do anything.
No, it's where you grow. You grow on that edge of your comfort zone and not knowing, getting comfortable with not knowing and just experimenting.
Yeah. And you discover it's a beautiful thing.
Absolutely. I mean, it's stuff that you could not, like, it's like getting out of the way and letting the magic happen. And it happens.
And hopefully you discover that you're much more capable of something than you ever thought.
Mm-hmm.
And that's the gift.
Yes. Yeah. Well, because honestly, think about it. You are challenging those doubting voices. And the more that you put yourself in the position to do that, the quieter they become.
Oh, yeah.
And other voices get louder, and that's really good. Like, that's what happened when that person reflected me as thinking about creativity. I owned the history of my own creative thought. I did something different with it because I owned it.
Yeah. Well, my last question that I ask each guest is I ask them to recommend a photographer for our listeners to discover and explore, and it can be anyone. Someone you've long admired or someone you've recently discovered. So who would that one photographer be and why?
That is like a mean question to ask someone like me.
You're the first person who's called me out on calling me a mean question. I've heard it described a lot of other ways, but that's a first.
That's ridiculous. Like, what? Like, look. Oh my gosh.
Yeah, all those books behind you. Yeah.
Oh my goodness. Okay. Oh, damn. That's almost impossible, but give me a minute. Well, I'm a polyglot in terms of my love of photography because it breaks a lot of genres. So that's what's really, really hard. It's like I have a lot. And one of the things that's really exciting is how many people I have been exposed to and so I'm not really answering your question. I'll get there. But the idea that like I love to come in from the academic and I love to come in from the context of like the landscape of the contemporary photography foundation. Like it's so interesting to watch how hard some definitions are held on to, even though they've been disproven for a very long time. Mm-hmm. So I love when people are pushing the edges and really on their own explore. And I've come across so many people like that. I mean, yesterday I've done 2 days of reviews. So like I've seen all this new work and how people push the boundaries. And I'm really interested in social documentary, and I'm really interested in conceptual. And, I love when there's the synergy of when someone is aware of using the medium for an exploration, not for a answer. So I guess if you pinned me down, I think I'd come up with Odette England. And when I was introduced to her work through Keeper of the Hearth, of course, it's about Roland Barthes' photograph that was never seen, the Winter Garden photograph, which is what the premise is behind his book, when he was talking about, honestly, the passing of his mother and looking for a photograph that held her essence. And that's where he elucidates punctum and talks about this idea of what's embedded. And what Odette did with Keeper of the Hearth, which is right here, is she was asking that question. Is it, there's been a lot of thesis writing about, is there really a photograph? Was there ever really a Winter Garden photograph? And nobody knows. Like, was that a real photograph? Was that a figment? Was that a compilation of things? And what Odette did was just put out a query, like, what would be the unseen photograph for you? And she didn't edit whatever anyone sent back. And if you could see the breadth of the interpretations of this, and then what happened in terms of the sequencing is spectacular. And she's very generous in terms of talking about the process. She's very open to people's collaborative parts in her exploration. So I would say Odette really just resonates for me with someone who uses our medium for a real-time exploration and is not going to know the answer, but is going to take us along through the questions. And it's going to be aesthetically beautiful and super thoughtful. There are 3 essays in here that couldn't be more different, and they're just show-stopping in their particular genre. So she said that she wanted to create a garden, and she did. You would come back to this again and again and again. And she put out one small book just recently, and I actually spoke about it because I got it and had to just talk about it as soon as I did. She really gives herself these parameters. So this is about 6 feet, which has to do with what we have just been all relegated to 6 feet away from each other. And so she takes these experiences, gives herself these parameters, and then goes on a field day. And I'm always, always delighted. And she has a book coming out in the fall. I think it's with St. Lucie Press. She's Australian, and she actually saw a correlation. She found her family owned a farm, and she found a manual that had to do with cows and started to see the correlation between how you talk about livestock and women.
Oh.
And then brings this idea together on all these different layers. And I'm totally ad-libbing here because there's much, much more to know about it. But so that's my answer, because it hits so many places.
Well, thank you for that, and thank you for your time. Though I do have one regret, though, in speaking with you, is I was trying to show some restraint in buying any more photo books for a while, and I know now that that's not gonna happen.
I can actually tell you that I've been had the fortune to go to Paris Photo for several years and bring people actually on an insider's guide, and the plethora of books that has come out in the last 10 years. I was embarrassed to have to buy a new suitcase, like tacky one at the airport. I mean, I'd come up with a whole system of how to get through, and this woman just looked at me like, honey, like, forget it. Like, you can't take out and carry all those separate bags on the airplane with you. So yeah, it's a little bit out of hand, but it's all good. And I have to say, I know that our time is up, but when I look at all the people that we have crossed over, I feel like that's what I mean about wanting to interview you, because you've talked to many of my friends and colleagues, and you're an educator. Yeah, so I would love to keep the conversation going. There's just so many places that we've crossed over.
Oh yeah. Let's keep the dialogue happening, whether it's being recorded or not.
Yeah,
I enjoyed this. This was great fun.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you for those questions. I really appreciate them.
Thanks to J. Sybylla Smith for joining us. Find out more about her and her work by visiting jsybyllasmith.com. Your thoughts and feelings about this show matter. If you haven't already, please write a review on Apple Podcasts or whatever service you use to listen to podcasts. It helps us to stand out among the many thousands of podcasts that are out there. Your voice makes a big difference. And remember, you can support the show by contributing to our Patreon effort or make a one-time or recurring donation via PayPal. Thanks to Stephanie Banks for her recent contribution. I'm also going to be leading my Using Your Life to Launch Your Photography online workshop this summer, actually next month. Find out more by clicking on the link on the website in the show notes or visit nabechicreative.com. We also provide a series of ebooks on photography available for purchase on our website. It's my way of sharing my experience and knowledge and another way for you to support the show. And if you can't find every episode of the show on whatever service you listen to podcasts, download the Candid Frame app, which is available for Apple iOS and Android. And because of your generosity, it's free to download and use. No additional purchases are required. The Candid Frame's audio engineer is Martin Taylor, who you can find at theothermartintaylor.com. The show's senior producer is Cynthia Parker, and our music is from Kevin MacLeod, whose royalty-free music can be found at Incompetech.com. And this is Ibarian X, and this is The Candid Frame.